Well, hello, welcome to Tale 3 Cabins. I've lived in this log home now for about 30 years. I started building it back in 1994. We finished it back in 1995. I did most of the work with the help of friends and family. The only thing I really subcontracted out was the foundation, the excavation work, and the plumbing. Everything else was all done with the help of friends and family. Now, a lot of people dream about building a log home or owning a log home, living in a log home. Some people vacation in log homes. They rent them out cabins in the woods or in the mountains and wonder what it's like if they had their very own. So I just want to go over 5 pros and cons of living in a log home. So the first pro, I would say, the coziness of actually living in a log home. You feel kind of like you're on a vacation or up in the mountains, or it's kind of relaxing to be in here. A lot of times we don't desire to go anywhere because it's nice just to stay in our home. After going outside and shoveling snow on a cold winter's day, to come in here and have a nice roaring fire going and it's all toasty warm in here, there's nothing better than that. There's nothing better than that feel of having a log home. All right, so a con. If you're going to build a log home or move to a log home, odds are you're going to be living in the woods. And living in the woods is a little bit different than living on a city block with a lot of concrete and not many trees. And the reason I say that, you might think, well, that's great. But living back in the woods, you have to deal with rodents and bugs. Now, year after year in the spring, usually late May, you're dealing with a lot of things hatching and coming to life. So carpenter ants is one of the biggies. Carpenter ants live in the woods. They love dead wood. And they also think as your house as dead wood. So you're constantly trying to fight them off, especially the first couple weeks into June and the last couple weeks in May is usually the worst. You can keep those things at bay. So coming from the suburbs and living out here, I did notice a difference when it comes to fighting off insects and rodents. Another pro of owning a log home, and maybe you haven't thought of this one, or maybe this one never even came to mind, but you can hang stuff anywhere and you don't have to worry about trying to find studs, and you don't have to worry about the little mollies that you have to pound into drywall and to try to hang up a shelf or a towel rack or a heavy picture or a heavy deer head, for example. Pretty much anywhere you need to put a nail or a screw, you have free reign of all the walls, and it's not an issue. You can hang very heavy things because you just drive it right into the solid logs themselves. We have a pretty good sized TV that we mounted up here a couple years ago in our living room. We took out a big entertainment center, and it was no problem to put this large screen TV up there with the lag bolts. We didn't have to worry about being off center because the studs didn't line up properly or having to add any backing to our drywall. So pretty much anything you want to hang anywhere and you're pretty much good to go anywhere in the house. Another con, and this it's kind of goes along the insect realm, but I think it's on a whole nother plane, and that's carpenter bees. Carpenter bees love the overhangs of log homes. They love to come behind those overhangs, make their little holes, lay eggs, vacate it, and these eggs hatch again in the spring, and then you have a whole new set of carpenter bees out there. Probably the worst part of that, though, is you leave those holes unattended, then the woodpeckers will come out and they start searching your siding and your trim, looking for where those holes were put and where those eggs are, and they're very good at poking holes in your wood and ruining your siding. That's a never-ending battle with us, also usually most prevalent in the spring, but a good part of the beginning of summer. You'll just be sitting here drinking coffee in the morning and you're going to hear tap, 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 tap. And there's a woodpecker somewhere trying to get to those carpenter bee eggs in the siding of your house. So I would say that's even worse than the carpenter ant situation. After 30 years, I've been thinking of just covering up my eaves and the soffit areas with vinyl, and then also cover it with metal trim with some sort of flashing. That way it will keep the carpenter bees out. I think if I do that now or within the next couple of years, I won't have to worry about replacing any pieces of wood that have been damaged already, that there's still enough meat on that wood to just cover it up, wrap it, and seal it up, and hopefully alleviate that problem. And then we would just have to watch out for carpenter bees trying to get into the logs themselves, which is a little bit easier to diagnose and a little bit easier to eradicate. Now, another pro is if you plan on building a house, if you're going to build a log house, there are some advantages to building a log house, and you're debating between conventional and log. Log, you may be able to build it yourself. It goes up a little bit quicker in some aspects, and it's a little bit easier to erect. For example, if we're stacking up these walls, once you have your floor plan laid out and you have your foundation in, you have your subfloor on top, and you start stacking the log walls, it goes pretty quick. We put this first floor up in a day, stacking all the logs. Once we got to the top of the first floor, then things slowed down a little bit because we had to make arrangements to get the second floor joist in and stuff like that. When you're stacking these logs, you basically have your outdoor siding already established, your insulation established, and your inside siding. For example, in a conventional home, you would have drywall, then you'd have studs, you'd have insulation of those studs. On the outside, you'd have some sort of sheeting, and on top of that sheeting, you would have some sort of vinyl or brick or some other outer protective coating, where the logs takes care of all of that in one step. Okay, so a con if you are going to build your own house is that these logs hold moisture and they adjust to the moisture levels in your area. So if you're in a drier climate, the moisture is going to leach out a little bit quicker, and these logs are going to shrink a little bit as that moisture is released. So you have to account for settling. This house settled probably a good 2.5 inches, almost 3 inches. So I had to leave space above the windows and the door jambs, and you have to account for settling in different situations. So above the windows, you had to leave a little bit of space above each window jamb, and that had some insulation in there so it could compress and that the siding and everything could slide easily as the logs were to shrink. Same thing with when you're hanging your kitchen cabinets and also your pipes, certain pipes, especially the vent pipes when it comes to your drain pipes, and the vents got to go out through the roof. Make sure that your vent pipe has a little slider in there basically that is going to allow it to settle 2 or 3 inches. If not, that vent pipe would crack. So just having forethought, log home companies can help you out in that because they deal with it all the time. But some folks might not realize just how drastically a log home can settle, and it just depends on your climate, the type of logs you're going to use, how well they were dried out, and the log system itself. I think the more primitive and the larger the logs, the more settling you have to deal with. There are other methods and styles that have less settling, and it's dealt with by the log home companies. So that is a bit of a con when it comes to building a house, but it's not a deal breaker if you plan ahead. I'm going to divide maintenance into a pro and a con. So on the inside, maintenance is a pro because once your log wall is up, you're really not going to change the style of that log wall. You're not going to paint it. You're not going to have to worry about sanding it. It's not going to chip and it's not going to crack. So there's very little maintenance when it comes to the inside of a log wall. You're not going to change the style of it too much other than just hanging things on the wall. Now a con is on the outside. You definitely have more maintenance on the outside than a conventional house that has vinyl siding or some sort of brick or stone. Now previously to this house, I lived in a house that had wood siding on it. It was cedar shake. It was already painted when I moved in, and it made for a lot more maintenance if I wanted to paint that home because there's a lot of sanding involved, scraping, chipping. So with the maintenance of a log home, you're going to have stain on the outside. The stain typically lasts anywhere from 5 to 10 years, and it just depends on the pigment of the stain. The darker, the longer it's going to last, and how much the sun hits it. So for example, underneath our front porch, we really haven't had to do anything. We did stain it a couple years ago just to match everything, but we didn't really need to. It was protected underneath the porch. It doesn't see the weather and it doesn't see the sun. So that stayed pretty much as is since day one. But in the backyard where the sun hits us, because the backyard faces south, we've had to stain that probably 3 or 4 times since we've been living here. We just stained it a couple years ago. Staining is not terrible. It's easier than painting with the scraping and the sanding of the other home that I had, but it is time consuming. It does take me a good 4 or 5 days to get this accomplished. It's not terrible when it comes to labor because a lot of the labor is done by pressure washers. So the first thing I would have to do is just pressure wash the whole house, let that dry for a day or two. And then recently I just rented a nice lift that I could get to everything without having to move a ladder around. And I used a sprayer and just stain that way. You have to be a little bit more careful when it comes to the windows and everything like that. And you do have to use a brush when you're talking your window trim. But the sprayer did go pretty quick. It is time consuming. We went with a bit of a darker pigment, and that seems to be holding up better than previous color stains that we used. So the last time we stained it was about 5 years ago, and right now that pigment is holding up fairly well. I'm going to say it's going to last at least another 5 to 6, maybe even 7 years. I don't know if I will be physically able to stain it again, or next time I might have to hire a company, but there is maintenance involved on the outside when it comes to staining and keeping up on your logs. Okay, last pro, and I'm going to take a little time on this one, is you can still be diverse on the style of your log home. Not every room has to be filled with wood that you really can't change the style of. So your interior partition walls can be decorated in any manner that you see fit. They could be put with drywall, shiplath, tongue and groove, wood trim. We've done that in one of our bedrooms. We did have drywall in 2 of the walls in our master bedroom. A couple years ago, we decided that we were just going to get rid of the drywall, and we put tongue and groove in there, and we like that feeling a little bit better. It's more wood. But there's other rooms that we have drywall in, and it's a little bit more of a conventional home, a little bit of a different style. And then our basement totally blows people away because they think of a log home, they think of rusticness, and they think of old-fashioned. They go down in the basement and they don't realize that there's a nice home theater down there. One side has got the home theater that's got a 100-inch big screen TV. We have theater seats in there, a nice little sound system. It's a great place to get away, great place when we have kids here for the holidays. They all go down there, pick out a movie, and they're pretty quiet then for a couple hours while they're watching the movie. Now on the other side of the basement, it takes people by surprise because it's a bit further on the spectrum of what you think a log home is, and that is that we put an arcade down in there. A little bit of a diner setup, arcade area, and that is also a great hit when it comes to having the kids over for the holidays and even the adults. So we spend a lot of time down there when there's a good group of people down. When we have folks visit that haven't come to our house before and we give them a quick tour, we start up top here and they love all the rusticness and a nice feeling of coziness of the log home, and then we take them downstairs and they're pretty much blown away by the contrast of the two. You don't have to stick with one theme. You can change things up a little bit, make things a little bit nicer. Our bedrooms upstairs, a little bit less loggy or less woody. My wife has a nice sewing room up there that has a little bit of logs and a little bit of drywall. We have a couple bedrooms up there that's mostly drywall except for the ceiling. We have a nice wood ceiling up there. So not every part of the home has to look like a gift shop of a Cracker Barrel somewhere. So it's a nice pro. You still have options. You're not stuck to one theme of your home. You can let your imagination go a little bit wild on some of the other rooms, or if you're going to have a basement, you could just completely go to the other end of the spectrum. And then the last con would be nooks and crannies, usually with the odd shapes, and I don't want to say odd, but the round shape of a log going up against flat trim leaves a lot of little nooks and crannies. And it's not so terrible so much on the inside, but on the outside it's a good place for bats to make homes, bees to make nests, a little bit harder to take care of. So we have round logs, and I preferred the round logs over square D where they're kind of round on the outside and flat on the inside. A trouble area for us is when you have the round logs and then it comes up against a flat piece of trim, particularly on the outside, is that left a little cubby in there. It was a place for mice to try to get in there or other rodents. So we ended up taking expanding foam insulation and spraying that in all the cubbies and then kind of cutting it off flat. And that stuff is stainable, so you can stain it the color of the house. But it was a little bit extra work that you're going to find when you have a log home, that you're constantly trying to block out little areas that, especially living in the woods, that things want to harbor and make little homes in. So not everything is flat and perfectly fits together like a conventional home. But for the most part, it's just planning, dealing with it, and there are ways to deal with it. All right, so that's the list of our 5 pros and cons. And I just want to say that sometimes we do go to somebody that bought a brand new house and it's decked out and it's very nice and it's conventional and it's got all the bright and white and it's open and it feels nice. But then being in there and in the long run, it doesn't feel homey. It doesn't feel like you could relax. It doesn't feel like you can unwind as easy. It almost feels sterile in a way. So from time to time you do look at other homes and you do feel like, well, maybe we should have went that route. But then when you come back here, you feel more relaxed, more cozier. It's a little hard to explain. If you build it yourself, you have a sense of accomplishment too. And then you definitely know where things are at, where pipes are at in the walls. You definitely know this house like the back of your hand if you do build it yourself. Yes, I think there's a little bit more maintenance when it comes to a conventional home that's vinyl sided or brick sided or stone. In the long run, it's more aesthetically pleasing. It's more relaxing, and it's just cozier overall. So that's 5 pros and cons for us living in a log home. If anybody out there that owns a log home wants to add anything in the comments, what some of their beefs are, or what some of their favorite things are, and what some of their cons are, please leave them down in the comments section. But that's going to do it for today. I appreciate everybody watching. Hope you enjoy and subscribe to these videos. Click on that little bell when you want to know when new one's coming out. And keep an eye on us. Take care, everybody.